Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A podcast. We are ready to roll.
I think that first question everybody has on their mind is, have you read the book of Jonah in the last week?
This week, I spent some time reading this book. It is incredible. Did you guys know that someone got swallowed by a big fish? This is crazy.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, I had someone last week, so we did our men's buy your own breakfast on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
And on Thursday morning, one of the guys came in, and he was like, that was so funny. He's like, when Blake first said that, I was like, man, the bar is really low for pastors at this church.
That's correct, yes. You need to read most of the books, but Jonah wasn't a requirement.
New Testament
I got in.
only.
Oh, that's so awesome.
So,
Yes, I have taken much of a beating this week for that one, so I'm quite all right.
But here's
it was good.
Here's the funny thing, because we talked about it on the live stream. Lorelei and I even talked about it.
Yes.
It's just funny that you were trying to help a benevolent request and manning the cameras,
Yeah,
and so we just throw you under the bus.
that was a recipe for disaster.
But
right
I'm just talking about, like, this is the dynamics, the difference in dynamics between the team that we have.
Yes.
Because if it was either Kyle or I who had done that, you would be gracious and kind.
This is true.
But it wasn't you, and so that really is too bad.
I just loved the reaction. I actually went back and watched it. Well, I had to show my wife, Erin. But when I say, actually, I haven't read the book of Jonah, and you're just like, really? And instantly I was like, what did I just say? I was like, something's not right here.
Oh,
Wait,
man.
wait. Well, you just said it so matter of factly. Like, well, I just haven't read that book, and it was like, what are you talking about? So, but we do have Kyle here.
Yeah.
On Blake and I've been bantering back and forth, but Kyle is here. Say hi, Kyle.
Hey, everyone.
So he's manning the cameras this week, and so we're alternating on our Q&A podcast this way, so that we can all be here while we've got this bit of plexiglass there in between Blake and I for safety reasons, so I don't throw anything at him when he confesses.
Yeah, we should have had that piece of
pastoral
plexi
shortcomings.
long
Well,
before COVID.
To be honest, and this is a really cool thing, there's another benevolent thing going on in our church right at the moment, but I handed it off to Laura today, so hopefully I don't have to try and do multitasking. 'cause
Just
that
put your
just
phone
doesn't
on
work.
silent mode. How about that? There's a simple solution.
This is true.
And then listen.
That's right. Pay attention.
So,
All right. Are we ready then?
I think
sure,
so.
why not?
All right. Let's jump in. The first question here is, were there human beings before Adam and Eve were created? When Cain was driven away by God into banishment because he murdered Abel, it says in Genesis that he took a wife and had children and then succeeding generations. Thank you.
Well, I think that obviously this is one of the areas where, depending on how you interpret the book of Genesis, it's going to really affect how you look at this story.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can. I don't see how you can say that there couldn't have at least been other human beings created, whether or not they were before or whether, whatever the story there. I know Kyle's going to have a different take on this, but whatever, I don't think you can honestly say that Adam and Eve are it and everyone descended from them, because the Bible clearly says that, when Cain is driven away, he's concerned that other people are going to murder him. And God puts a mark on him to prevent that from happening. So there is this fear that he's got of other people around. If there were no other people, God would not have put a mark on him, right? However you view the story, whether you view it literally, whether you view it as a metaphor, however you view that, you have to wrestle with this, and you have to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll jump in just before Kyle does,
Yeah.
because he's going to have a really
Heretical view?
heretical view. I'll say it to start with, because when I started the church and when we first started doing the Q&A podcast, either you, Kyle, or Brock at some point mentioned your view of Genesis, and I was like, what? Because I've said it before, I've grown up in a conservative church culture, which I think all of us have to some degree, where it was taught that this Bible is literal and Adam and Eve were first, and then Cain and Abel, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I would assume that there's probably multiple listeners to this podcast that are going to be, what? Right? Because they would hold that view, or at least been taught it along the way. But because of what you just said, Doug, I have heard sermons or different pastors try and explain their way out of this one, keeping Adam and Eve first and keeping Cain and Abel second. Then you have to do some dance to kind of figure out where these other people came from.
What does that dance, like, honestly, what does that dance look like? How do they explain it?
Well, I've heard that maybe Cain and Abel were older, so that there was lots of siblings already, and the siblings had already moved out.
Yeah, I've heard
and
the
this
same.
Cain and Abel thing happens.
Yeah.
I suppose that's possible, but that's a lot of kids, right? Like Adam and Eve got to be producing at a good rate there to make that happen. I don't know.
You also, and not to be too crude, but you also then immediately fall into incestuous issues.
Totally.
Right?
And I've heard that one explained away many times as well. The people were perfect, and as the generations went
perfect
on, then
if you take a literal view and you take it Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, that's after the fall.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer. I've said many times that when it comes to this, I'm kind of in a place where I'm like, I'm okay. I don't worry about it. I don't have a specific answer on it. I would kind of, I guess, start to fall where I'd be in a similar spot to where Kyle is, in that the purpose of Genesis 1 is not a scientific explanation of the creation of the world. Mm-hmm. The writer of Genesis was not thinking, I need to explain this. Yeah. That wasn't their purpose. They were explaining the why. They were not explaining the how. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, however, I guess where Kyle and I would be different would be, I would say, I don't know.
Right.
Whereas Kyle would have a more stronger viewpoint, but I'll let him explain it.
Yeah, and go for it, Kyle. Explain it. I want to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I would, you guys have already alluded to, I'd hold that there were other beings out there. Joshua Swamidas, The Genealogical Adam, did a great book recently on that one. I actually just sat down with somebody talking about that one. There's a lot, and I'll try to then succinctly put it all I'm not a biologist, I'm not a chemist, so please, I'm stating above my credentials for sure when I say it this way. I've read and heard that we could not have the genetic diversity that we have now without a larger base population than just two. So first of all, the genetic diversity we've got accounts for something. But jumping to the biblical part of it, I think you could hold a 7-day view still with this and still bring this view in together of there being other people. And this is where I think Genesis 2 is actually a continuation of a story, but a narrowing of the story from Genesis 1, where Genesis 1 is dealing with the broader creation, and then Genesis 2 is dealing with God's intimate relationship with humanity. So if you jump to Genesis 2, verse 15, it says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden." Adam isn't created in the garden. He's taken from elsewhere and then placed in the garden. And so where's he taking him from? Is he one of many? All those pieces are opened up. And the language behind Adam's name, if you get into the Hebrew, helps us understand that. So Adam, or Adam, is both the name for, it would be more of an equivalent to like earthling for us, because Adam was created from the Adamah. The earthling was created from the earth, would be kind of the English equivalent. So you've got this one man being taken and placed in the garden. And then, when they leave the garden, there's other people out there. So I think you can hold a wide variety of views for that to be there. But I think there were other people from what I've read on biology, though I'm well underqualified for, and biblically, I think it's right there. Other people to be feared of, and Adam was taken in from somewhere else.
Yeah, and I can respect that view, but the problem I have with it, or I guess not a problem, the question I have with it, is then how do you explain sin entering the world, right?
Yeah,
and that in that regard, there isn't an explanation for sin entering the world, unless it was always there.
Right.
In which case, then there gets, and this is where I say, for me, it's not that's not the issue.
Yeah.
When I say I'm going to reserve judgment, and I'm not going to have an opinion.
Yeah.
It's the follow-up issues and all the dominoes that fall after that effect.
Totally.
So how do you explain when sin entered the world?
So one way I might look at it, again, there's people way smarter than me that have wrestled with this on all sides. So this is where I just personally have landed. Is I think the uniqueness of humanity that we know in the image of God and all those pieces, some of those characteristics come in uniquely at our level of evolution, where Homo sapiens sapien for our genus is where we are, is the first time consciousness and awareness, empathy, all those pieces are there at a new level. And I believe that's where God's image and soul and all those pieces come into the biblical perspective. So if Adam and Eve, as archetype or literal, are the first ones of our genus, well, then they have this consciousness. And if Adam went out and, let's say, just for comparison's sake, Homo sapiens sapien then breeds and can with Neanderthal, does that image-bearing capacity of empathy and the brain difference, the frontal lobe pieces that are different to us, are those then passed on? And that's where the awareness and ability to have mindfulness of sin and all those pieces comes in. And so is it the uniqueness of our stage in the evolutionary process that can then be passed along through breeding both with others like us and closely related like the Neanderthal? And a lot of us have Neanderthal blood within us, and that's been shown in some genetic sequencing too.
But that's not my question. You didn't answer my question. Is when did sin enter the world?
So that's
the actual, like, so if you even take a theistic evolution
Yeah.
view, God starts the Big Bang, boom, everything begins.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And everything's rolling along just fine.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like there would be any sin in God's creation.
Right.
Correct? Now, at some point, we know there's sin.
Correct.
So how and where does sin come in?
So that's where once we have Homo sapiens sapien, relationship with God, intimacy, understanding of Him, then there can be the expectation and communication back and forth. You know me, you know my ways. The minute that relationship and capacity to hold that relationship is in humanity, then sin can enter because we can choose to step away from that relationship and trust in God. And that's where I see there's lots of room. Once that relationship has been started, then it must be followed through with. And so there's got to be a point where we could hold the capacity for it.
Okay, so then, based on what you're saying,
Yeah.
we are not born sinful.
I think we are. I think
Well, no, that's not what your own argument was. We're created in the image of God,
Yep.
right? And that at some point, because we have that divine image of God, we have the ability or the right to choose, and at some point we will stop choosing, and that's sin. So if that's your argument,
Yeah.
then we're not born sinful, and then because of that, you're undermining a lot of the New Testament.
No, I'm not saying we aren't born sinful. I think we're born into now a world. The minute that our species got to the point where we were able to hold relationship with God, that expectation was there. If Adam and Eve are genealogical and ancestral mother and father, were introduced to this relationship, the capacity for all those pieces, all of us fall short of that the minute we're conscious. And that's where I think a lot of people would argue a baby or a child that dies isn't held accountable for those things. But I think the minute we have awareness of right and wrong, that is then we are born in sin, and we will then lean and choose that all the time to sin. And I think, therefore, in that way of defining it, we're born sinfully.
But then your own argument says then that God is the creator of sin. Then you're saying sin was inherent there in creation, in which case you're making God the creator of sin. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that you have to answer this. I'm saying for me,
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with your line of thinking. You and I have had many conversations on it, and I can appreciate all of it. It's not the scientific questions that cause me to reserve judgment. It's the theological ones and the philosophical ones that aren't based in Genesis, but that are actually more based in the New Testament.
Yep.
Where Paul talks about some of the New Testament about who we are
Yep.
and who we were before we come to Christ.
Right.
That is where I find the struggle with answering some of these things I'm not saying that there needs to be an answer or that there is an answer. I'm saying that's where, for me, I kind of go, I don't really know, because of the philosophical and the theological things that arise from it.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying is then kids are born sinless until they learn to until they develop this age of accountability idea, which, I grew up in church where they talked about the age of accountability, which is an interesting thing that we make a whole theology based on that's nowhere in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a guy on YouTube a while back who was trying to explain it, and he proof texted 2 verses that I was like, that is not okay. That you're just say it's not in the Bible. Don't proof text verses.
Yeah.
If that's where you land, okay. And so there are people, and I think the majority of the church would say that if a child is born and passes away before they reach the ability to think for themselves and make a decision, that there's grace that would cover them.
Yeah.
Whereas it seems to me that your argument is that before they reach that point, it's not so much that grace has covered them, but that they haven't sinned.
No, I would say this is where I guess I would, and these are, I haven't sat and thought about exactly how to answer all these things. So this is off
This
the
is
top.
a discussion,
Totally.
and I don't have the answers either. I'm just asking questions.
And I appreciate that because it's helping me flesh out how to explain what's in my head. But I think it would more lean at we are born flesh and therefore we are sinful, but those sins we won't be held accounted for, or we don't even have the capacity to then be even aware of sinfulness. I've got an 18-month-old at home right now. I know she's already stepping into, I know how to do wrong, right? Like I'm fully aware of that. But and then yes, again, it's hard to talk about where the lines are biblically for the age of accountability and all that. I think we are born sinful for sure, but I think it's almost hard, if not impossible, to back up to how that relationship started and where it was there. I think the minute we've got capacity for righteousness, we've got capacity and therefore defaulted to sinfulness. And we have initiated that in and of ourselves, both systemically and individually. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. Those are some pretty vague words, I know, but
I think those are good words. But I guess and this is where for me,
yeah,
the question comes. If you go to Genesis and you read this Genesis 2, the fall of man, there is a third character there. There's not just Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
There's a third character, the snake.
Yeah.
And the snake represents something.
Yeah.
And I don't believe it represents something inside Adam and Eve.
No.
It represents something outside Adam and Eve.
Yep.
Because creation was good, right? Until sin entered the world. However you believe creation happened, whether you believe in a literal 6 days, 10,000 years ago, whether you believe in theistic evolution, like Kyle does, I'm good. Like, I don't believe that this is a salvation issue.
Nope.
But again, my question is, when God created, poof, and it begins, right? Yeah. It's all good. And Genesis 1 tells us it's all good. So when humans come into the world, at some point, it was all good still. And at some point, some outside agency led Adam and Eve, according to Genesis 2, into sin. If the Old Testament is in Genesis 1 is metaphor, like you're saying, and Adam and Eve come along, then, and I guess maybe you could argue that Satan came along and started leading people astray.
Yeah.
But then the interesting thing would be that you could then potentially have some people who are still perfect and some people who are not.
Right.
But in that case, how do you reconcile those two? Yeah. And maybe Adam and Eve were the first sinners, and that's why Cain's worried that he's going to be murdered by somebody, because they'll know he's a murderer. They'll know he sinned. And so I don't know. I'm just like, these are some deep theological, philosophical issues, and this is where my brain goes when we start talking about these things. Because this is just Doug personally, I'm less interested in the science end of it than I am in the theological end of it and the philosophical end of it.
Yeah.
And so I like we've talked about, we've referenced Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, which takes the whole, first several billion years of life in the universe based on modern theory and condenses it down to 200 pages, which is really wonderful. But for me, it always goes to the philosophical and the theological ends. I find those much more interesting than the scientific ones.
Yeah, and I don't think they're counter to one another. I think they're complementary to one another, and so, in a lot of ways, at least, they can help reinforce one another. I don't think, and yeah, I won't get into the whole can of worms of how much of even the Genesis account and introduction of sin, how much of that is literal. All those pieces. I think there was definitely something that took place, but
Yes, but you would say it's not literal.
yeah,
And so, and I'm not debating whether or not it's literal.
Yeah.
Please hear me there. But I guess my question is, like, and this is where is someone who holds to a theistic evolution.
yeah,
Like, in my brain, I'm like, where and how does sin enter the world and corrupt all of humanity and all of creation?
yeah.
There is. I don't know how they reconcile that, the New Testament idea of who we are, of creation. That for me personally, those things mean more to me than how it happened.
Yep.
It matters more to me that people would understand we have to embrace, as followers of Jesus, a worldview that says our world is broken and creation is broken.
Totally.
Not necessarily by our sin, but by sin.
Yeah.
Tornado last weekend went through the Midwest of the United States.
Yeah.
Just absolute total destruction. Where do you get a worldview biblically that understands that thoughtfully and intelligently understands that? Because there are some Christian worldviews that would explain that I would go, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
And so I think that the New Testament does give us an explanation for those things. Where, for me, the theistic evolution falls apart is when I look at the New Testament and I see those things and I trust and I know those things. Mm-hmm. Then if you work backwards, I go, okay, so how does that apply there? And that's for me where and I'm not saying you have to have an answer. I'm not saying there is an answer. I don't know. I'm just saying this is for me where the disconnect comes.
Yeah.
Because at some point, what God created was all good, and now it is not. And there was another agent that played a part in that. Yes, humanity did, definitely, for sure. But there was another agent there.
Yeah.
So, and there are no historical records.
No.
Well, and that's the whole. There is theology that makes a big deal out of the bloodlines, right? That Adam and Eve passed down this sinful thing, and that Christ is born, of the Holy Spirit or of God rather than of seed of man, because then that bloodline or that curse or sinfulness, whatever you want to call it, would have been passed on to him, but he was other, right? So yeah, if you get away from a literal, maybe Adam and Eve or the snake in the garden, then you go, okay, well, does that matter, right? So just a thought I was having as you guys were discussing there.
Yeah, well, I think if we wanted to get into genealogies in Matthew and Luke, I think there's a lot to be wrestled with there because those don't seem to add up either, right? So I don't think we can make the case that those were...
What do you mean they don't add up?
They differ and argue with one another and aren't even able to be backed up necessarily. Like the Matthew's is 2 sets of 14 or 3 sets of 14.
Three. It's
three
three
sets of
sets of
14.
some amount.
And they miss certain characters.
Yes, but isn't that my base understanding of that was because Matthew was making it this point of there's a certain number, then a break. Is it to Noah, and then to David, and then to Jesus?
Yeah, he was trying to make that
point in that. He's not constructing an actual genealogy of the history of the world.
Yeah,
but he's putting a narrative to his Jewish readers that helps them to. There's a point behind it. Right?
Correct, but I can't remember which one leads to Joseph. So that one, if you're trying to base an argument for sinfulness coming to Jesus through his bloodline, Joseph, if you know the story, had nothing to do with it. Jesus is 0% Joseph DNA.
Well, that would be Matthew,
right? And I thought so too. So that one, you can almost disqualify in a case of passing sinfulness to Jesus through that bloodline, because Joseph had nothing to do with it physically. So then you go to the Mary one in Luke. And I can't remember. I listened to an episode talking about it recently of a podcast that was talking about that. It was a really good scholar, and he emphasized that it wasn't worth being concerned about because that wasn't the point. Like Matthew tried to make this point. It wasn't trying to say, here's the bloodline, therefore we can prove Jesus' flesh was safe because of this. It was making something different. But
yeah, and that's worth, like, we got to understand why things were written, and we talked maybe we didn't talk about it at some point recently. Getting back to, maybe it was last week with Heiser, and he talked about he doesn't hold the ancient writers to a modern standard.
Yeah.
And I just love that idea. We got to get into their mindset.
Yeah.
They were much more worried about wisdom and how to live right and understand the world than they were trying to explain how it happens.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's, I guess, as I get older and read my Bible and think of these things, I just think that too often we, Christians, or any human being, want to put pretty bows on everything.
Yep.
Like
Yes.
everything has to be explained to a certain degree, right? And I think of, the bloodlines or the importance of blood in the Bible. Obviously, we have sacrifices and the blood atones and all those things. But just because that's there and because there's, blood mentioned in a different passage doesn't mean that they have to be
Totally.
interconnected, right? Like that's...
Yep.
And going back to the why is the writer writing about that? Why is, the sacrifice in the Old Testament so important? And why is it, that Hebrews brings it up in Hebrews? Why is he writing that? Is he writing it because he want to put a pretty bow on it and, wrap it all up so we understand it? Or is there a deeper and more probably theological meaning to it than, a scientific and real meaning, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
So
I like it. Okay, well, you've enlightened me much, Kyle and Doug. So we'll
And I didn't
move
get
on.
called a heretic.
Well,
only
I think
preemptive.
actually-
only
I
preemptively.
called you
we
as
called you a heretic
right
in
at the
the
beginning.
intro.
Yeah,
So I
preemptively, but not following.
didn't feel
Yeah,
any. But
you-
like I said,
Slightly redeemed
and
yourself.
you and I were talking about this recently. Like you and I in a lot of our areas of theology don't differ that much.
No.
And so for me, this is an area where I can see your point of view,
Yep.
and I don't necessarily disagree with it. Like I said, I've reserved the right to not have an opinion on how the world was formed.
Yep.
I'm totally good with that.
Yeah.
And so as a result, I can sit there and I can go, I see flaws on both sides.
Totally.
And I don't have to. And this is where Christians, it's not just Christians. In the world today, we have to have an opinion on everything. And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so liberating about sometimes going, I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
And everyone who's listening to the podcast, it's okay sometimes to just say to someone, I don't know.
Yeah.
That humility would probably be very attractive.
I've always loved my dad early as a kid. I think probably when
You loved your dad when you were a kid?
yeah, early on.
Hey, we'll pray for your relationship to be restored.
But he would say that he was really excited to watch home videos with Jesus when he gets to heaven. Like he wants to see the creation of the earth and he wants to see all these things, right? He's like,
Totally.
I'm sure that it's video recorded and he's got a library, right? And we get to sit there and we get to watch all these things. So
I remember, we're way off topic now, but there's an old Saturday Night Live skit where somebody dies and goes to heaven. And he's talking to the angel, and he says to the angel, the angel says, "Do you have any questions?" He says, "Yeah, like tell me the thing that would most blow my mind, like the most surprising thing." And the angel said, "I can't tell you that because you couldn't handle it." And he says, "Okay, tell me like the 472nd most amazing thing." And the angel says, "Professional wrestling is real."
Oh, that's awesome.
So we are way off topic.
there you go.
Officially
So there's lots of things to
way,
learn in this
way
world.
off.
All right, next question. This is a good one. Timely. Should Christians participate in the classic Christmas traditions, decorating a Christmas tree, putting up lights, trading gifts, or is there reason to give them up and to focus better on celebrating Christ? Would it be better off to adopt more Jewish traditions around this time, example Hanukkah, that would allow us to connect more directly to traditions that are relevant to the first century Christians?
Okay, this is a really cool question, and before I get into answering the question, I think we need to explain what Hanukkah is.
Yes.
And where Hanukkah comes from.
Yeah, I'd like to know because for me, the only thing I know about Hanukkah is that it rhymes with harmonica, and Adam Sandler sang a really good song. So that's what I know.
It's all covered in the book of Jonah.
Oh, if I would read this book.
So
that's awesome.
the Old Testament ended, the writings of the Old Testament ended 3rd or 4th century. I can't remember how you number it. It's like 380 BC. Mm-hmm. Is that the 4th century BC or the 3rd century? That'd be the 4th century
Yeah,
BC.
4th century BC.
It just that always messes me up. Like we're in the 21st century and it starts with 20. So in the 4th century BC, the Old Testament writing ended. But that doesn't mean nothing happened. Things still happen. And there's this whole intertestamental period. And we referenced some of the books that were written in the intertestamental period in a previous podcast. the Maccabees, the books of the Maccabees, would be a part of these intertestamental literature. So during the intertestamental time, it's about 160 to 180. Forgive me if my dates are a little off. BC, before the birth of Christ, there was this. The Israelites were ruled over by, I believe, the Greeks at that time, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, that's pretty tight on the line there.
But it goes. There's other people coming in and ruling them a bunch of times.
They get overseen by 3 different people within the
Yes.
Second Temple period.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
Basically, not because Israel gets taken over, but because the people who
Took them over.
took them over get
The
taken
world,
over.
basically, yes.
Yeah. So Rome is not on the scene yet.
Not yet. No.
And so in that period, there are these basically rebels who rise up and lead this revolt. And when they lead this revolt, is this where
Judas
Antiochus
Maccabees.
the Fourth?
What's that?
Is this where Antiochus the Fourth is, or am I missing?
I don't know of Antiochus, but
Antiochus the Fourth was one of the foreign leaders who desecrated the temple.
okay.
But anyway, the Maccabees, led by Judas Maccabees,
The hammer.
not Judas with Jesus. This is 160 to 180 years before that.
Yeah.
Lead this revolt, drive out their oppressors, and then they want to clean and reconsecrate the temple. Now, there's no windows in the temple, so it's dark in the temple. And in the temple, they only have enough oil for 1 day. And there's 8 days to Passover. It's going to take them 8 days to clean up, something along those lines. Again, I'm not really familiar. I'm just telling you the broad strokes of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have 1 day's worth of oil, but they set out to begin cleaning out the temple so they can reconsecrate it. I believe so they can reconsecrate it. And miraculously, the oil lasts 8 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is where the candle, the menorah, the candle holder that you see Jewish with 8 candles on it, that's where that comes from. So Hanukkah is not, like when you think of Passover and how Passover ended up turning into Jesus saying, do this now in remembrance of me,
Right.
which is a stunning statement,
Yeah.
right? It would be like a pastor getting up in church and being like, from now on, Christmas is going to be about my birth.
Yeah.
Like in their minds, that's what this was. And so it's easy to then start to look at all these Jewish holidays and go, okay, they're just the pre-Christian version of them.
Right.
You've got that with Passover, you've got that with Pentecost, and those would be probably the 2 biggest ones. And so it's easy to think that about Hanukkah, but Hanukkah is not some Jewish holiday that is some sort of foreshadowing of Christ. It's a Jewish holiday that celebrates this miracle that took place in the 2nd century, I guess, BC,
Yeah.
if I'm getting my numbering right.
Yeah.
So just so we understand where Hanukkah comes from, it wasn't some sort of prophetic holiday that was foreshadowing the birth of Christ.
Right.
I just wanted to lay that as a groundwork, just because maybe people don't understand where Hanukkah came from.
Well,
Though,
then-
sorry, go ahead.
I guess the question that comes to me then, just at the end of this question, it says they want us to connect more, or would it be better to connect more directly to traditions that are relevant to the 1st century Christians? Would the 1st century Christians have done Hanukkah?
It would depend if they were Jews or not.
Right.
And,
Yeah,
even,
that's true.
then, it might depend because I think the Jews were already starting to. Like I've been reading a little bit more early church stuff, and they were getting rid and not holding on to anything that had any violence. And you would have
Right,
seen a lot of that in the Patient Ferment.
Exactly.
And so this holiday really does start out of a rebellion,
Right.
and celebrating the rebellion and the violence that would have gone in tow. Even the zealots, like Peter, would have been a zealot, and therefore like a domestic terrorist.
Yeah.
Is what he would have been. In that same camp of Judas the Hammer and the Maccabee brothers led us to victory over them.
Right.
Let's do that again. So they
Which is what they wanted Jesus to be.
totally.
Yeah.
So they might have rejected that just based on that holiday was based out of violence.
Oh, yeah, okay. So it probably
And
depend
maybe,
on
but
church
in any
group to
case-
church group or whichever, right?
Very quickly, as the church spreads beyond Judaism,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you are not going to have Hanukkah.
No.
You're not going to have Christmas either.
No.
Christmas didn't come along until long, long later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we adapted a pagan holiday.
What, man, maybe that's another question for another.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody should ask, where did Christmas come from?
Totally.
Because we did adapt and co-opt a pagan holiday,
Yeah.
just like much of Christianity
Yeah.
began co-opting other things out of the culture around them,
Yeah.
and redefining it and re-explaining it. So that's where Christmas came from. So they didn't celebrate Christmas in the first century. Those early Christians, they were not like, "Hey, where's the tree?"
They're like, let's survive and remember Jesus is Lord.
So that's
basically
good, because that answers the second part of the question then. There really isn't any first century Christmas traditions or Christ's birth traditions that we should be worried about, because there just weren't any yet, right?
I don't think it's easy to imagine how much the church has changed in 2,000 years.
Well, yeah.
Right? 2,000 years ago, they gathered together in houses and broke bread.
Yeah.
That was, and survived and dealt with persecution. Right? That was what they were doing. So and I'm not saying it's bad or anything that we're doing necessarily is bad. And I'm not saying Christmas traditions are bad. I just think it's worth recognizing everything, right? We've had, foreshadowing the next question, we've had people who've gotten upset because we've changed the way we do Sunday morning church. Because people are like, Sunday morning, that's the way church needs to be done. And they don't understand. 2,000 years ago, when the church happened, they didn't gather on Sunday mornings to sing songs and listen to a guy preach for a half an hour.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't the way they did church. But the problem with a 2,000-year-old religion is we assume everything that's been around for our life has been around the entire time.
Yeah.
And so it's not bad, not against it. And so maybe this gets into the answering of the question.
Yeah.
To give them up better on celebrating Christ, I would hope that even in some of the Christian traditions, the Christmas traditions, you are celebrating Christ. Mm-hmm. And Kyle and I were talking about this. Was it today or was it a couple of days ago? We were talking about, it was last on the weekend. We were talking about finding Christ and finding God in everything.
Yeah.
That we have to embrace this mindset that sees God everywhere. Even non-Christians, if they are searching for God, they are painting pictures with their art, with movies sometimes, with TV shows, with books that are written.
Songs. Yep.
That reflect, songs as well, that reflect this desire to connect with God and that God can use. And then we were talking about how Rich Villodas, who is a American pastor and author, and also apparently a fan of Marvel, during the Loki series that was on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
I really appreciated, because I follow him on Instagram. He posted after every episode of Loki just some preaching points if you wanted to preach a series on the book of Loki, which was really cool and very thoughtful. And he was finding God in that.
Yeah.
A lot of our Christmas traditions have a Christian background.
Yeah.
We haven't learned them.
Yeah.
So it's, I
So
think
should we
find
decorate
Christ in
trees and put up lights? Is that okay?
I will jump in
Well,
quick.
I have lights
before-
and a tree up, so
Before you go there, Josie clarified for us, commenting in on YouTube, that the menorah actually has 9 candles. I believe the 8 are to represent the day, and then the 9th one is to represent the whole of the miracle, if I'm getting that correct, remembering. But, sorry. She commented, said
Okay.
I'd toss it in.
again, like
Thank you, Josie.
I am sharing my recollection of that,
Totally.
the establishment of that holiday from years and years and years ago of Bible college.
Yeah.
No, decades ago of Bible college. So forgive me. You are right. There is 9, but I do know there's at least 8 because
Yeah, it
there's
was
4 on
8
each
days.
side.
Yep, and
Yes.
4 on each side, yep.
Yeah. So
On trees, I'm going to quote here from Jeremiah 10:3. For the customs of...
Oh, here we go.
I'm going to punch you. I knew someone was going to do this.
I'm doing this just for fun. For the customs of the people are vain. For one, and this is King James where I found it too.
Oh, yeah.
For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good. And let's talk about the issue of following the things that the pagans do. So the Bible says we shouldn't do trees, guys. So what do you say?
The pagans were doing Christmas before Christmas was even invented, is what we're happening here. We're back in the book of Jeremiah.
600 years before the time of Christ.
Yes.
Because that's during the exile period.
Right.
Which was 580 BC.
But
So-
Kyle's bang on. I got a buddy who tells me every year that I'm worshiping the devil. 'cause
I can
put a
remember
tree
as a
in
kid somebody telling my parents that you can't have a Christmas tree because Jeremiah 10:3 is about it. That passage is actually about idols, putting idols in your house. And if your Christmas tree is an idol,
Absolutely.
then you should probably deal with it.
Totally.
But you should probably
most
deal
of
with the other idols in your house then as well. Like for me, my hockey sticks, or for,
When they- we
right?
don't-
Like
we-
go down the
Your
list.
cell phone.
Right.
We
yes.
think we've moved past idols.
Yeah.
We've just exchanged them for less religious ones.
Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely.
So, but that's a whole nother story.
All right. Do we want to get into the next question?
Sure.
Okay. It's long. Maybe I'll read part or should I read it all?
By the time you on the fly try to cut, because I've done that before,
Yeah,
you'll
okay.
end up.
All
we
right.
may as well
I'll
just
read it all. So hopefully everybody's listening well. I've been going to this church for 14 years, and I've witnessed several times when it felt like a large part of the congregation left. This year, it feels there has been a lot of offense taken and hurt feelings and families leaving for multiple reasons. I have a lot of mixed emotions every time this happens. I have a few questions. My questions are not to blame or cause even more division. I am seeking wisdom and clarity to help process the feelings and thoughts I have on this experience. First, what are your thoughts on why this happens? Okay, so that's question number one. When I talk to families who have left, seemingly some of the decisions to leave are tied to people feeling hurt by the leadership of our church. What are your thoughts on that? So there's a second question. What are your thoughts on that? I understand that the leadership of our church are not people who are I understand that the leadership of our church are people who are learning to follow God the best way they can and obviously can't be expected to be perfect. What accountability and relationships do each of you have in your life to help you handle the difficult conflicts that arise between you and the members of your church so that you have wise counsel in handling the conflict the way God would want you to? So there's a third question. Again, my questions are from a broken heart, and I'm just trying to understand, not trying to cause any damage.
I appreciate this question so much.
Yeah.
And I want to begin by saying thank you to the person who sent it in. I love that this podcast gives the opportunity for people to ask questions like this.
Yeah, totally.
Because oftentimes in the church, we aren't comfortable asking these sorts of questions because we know we're supposed to love each other. But I don't feel like there's anything unloving in this question at all. No. And I feel like if we ever reach the point as leadership where we don't allow people to ask questions, we're way off base. And I would hope that if that happened in this church, everybody listening to this podcast would run, because that's not the way that a church should ever be operated. So we are all, let me just begin by saying this person referenced, we're all learning to follow God. Absolutely. That includes leadership, which is why you should be able to question leadership. We should have, as we talked about in a previous podcast, some maturity as leaders, but we are all still in process. And when the leaders become unquestionable, you are dangerously close to finding yourself in a cult. And so we can't ever become a church where you can't ask hard questions.
Yep. So
I just wanted to say that. Thank you to the person who asked this question. I really appreciate it. We're not upset. I'm not upset. So my thoughts on why this happens. Let's maybe take the first question first. I think there's different reasons why this happens. And I'll speak widely, then I'll get more narrow. Widely, why it happens is a multitude of reasons. Sometimes good reasons, and sometimes not good reasons. But in a wide range, some of the things that cause a large number of people to leave can be unhealthy and can be healthy. Sometimes people can leave because they just don't like what the leadership is doing, and that can be right or wrong. Again, there's no judgment in any of this, and I don't want to paint anyone with a negative light. Even I was thinking about this question, and I was thinking, I want to answer this in a way that doesn't appear like anyone who's ever left for any reason I'm throwing under the bus, because I could have been the reason for them to leave, absolutely. So, but there are things. Any change brings change on the widest scale of all. As soon as you change something, people are going to leave your church. We painted the sanctuary once, and we had people leave the church because they didn't like the color of the walls. Staff change affects. Wait a second.
Your mic died. Can you plug in?
Check 1 2.
There you go. You're back.
Okay, it must be this cable.
Yep.
staff change causes change. And that's a big one. And it follows about a year to 18 months after the staff change.
Yeah.
So it's not always recognized. But there are people who are connected with different staff people. And when those staff people leave, those people feel less connected and they eventually leave.
Yeah.
COVID changed everything. And I know there are people who've left lots of churches and gone to different churches because of how churches responded to COVID. Sometimes just because they took a step back and they re-examined their life and they decided they wanted and needed something different.
Yep.
But change brings change. And on the widest scale, I think that's ultimately what it is. I'm not addressing, I want to speak to the current group of people this person refers to, but I thought I'd start wide. You guys have anything to add?
If you want to go first, Blake.
Yeah, I think I would say that to narrow it a little bit before you get to that, Doug. I think offense does happen. Like sometimes we offend each other. We're people. And I'll just start off by wearing this one a little bit, not in this church, but in the church that I was pastoring at previously. I remember a youth leader getting really angry at me. And I was really offended by it. I was like, how dare he be angry at me? I'm the leader, right? And I think I probably answered that question like that. And then later, talking to someone who is more wise than me, they said, well, who are they going to question? Like, you're the leader. You're the one who made the decision. Like, who else are they going to get upset at? I was like, oh, yeah. So I do believe in that situation. I went back and made peace. I definitely made peace with that person. I don't remember the specific situation, but things happen. Like you say, change brings
And just because
change,
you
right?
make a decision that upsets somebody doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad decision.
Well, true.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I'll speak even maybe more broadly to start than you have, Doug, of there is no church that exists now that started in early Christianity, first century, that continues on. There are ebbs and flows to every church and life cycles to churches, and I think, to be honest, that's a good thing. We see what happens when traditions and certain establishments carry on for so long. They do get worse and worse, it seems, because humans are involved. So I think there's a good cycle in humans, and any human-involved establishment, churches included, need to have life cycles. And I say that, I guess, hesitantly, but also nervously and humbly. Like, that means living springs won't last forever. Maybe
That's
to
a
offer
pretty
that.
broad statement, though, because
Yeah.
when you narrow it down, now you're telling me, Kyle, that I'm going to get hurt, that living springs will not last forever, and my feelings are going to get hurt at some point.
Not saying hurt necessarily, but there's an ebb and flow. There's life cycles. It could end just simply because other things have moved on and we aren't contributing. Whatever.
Yeah.
I don't
No,
think
I
it
agree.
necessarily leads to hurt.
Yeah.
So that's speaking as broad as I possibly can. But then second, like the changes, and we sometimes don't even know what those changes are that have happened. I know there was a season a number of years ago where we lost a number of people, and when we looked back on it, there was just a lot of just movement and busyness going on amongst our leadership that we attribute then, looking back at that season, of we weren't prepared for the growth that we experienced leading up to that season, and then struggled to keep up with where we were at as a church. And then people felt that, and that people left. So sometimes it can be good things, it can be bad things, it can just be different things. That's just speaking really broadly still, I think. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, and so the second question is, when I talk to families who leave, seemingly some of the decisions to leave are tied to people feeling hurt by the leadership of our church. What are your thoughts on that? And I'll speak to this first and just say it saddens me a lot. I take full responsibility for most, if not all, of that. I know we made a lot of change when we came to relaunch. I know that there were a lot of people who were really upset about that. And interesting thing is that, and I said to Laura Lee numerous times in the last 4 or 5 years, I feel like in many ways I'm finally starting to figure out how to do this job. And I'm finally, like, the pastoral part of me, I don't think has ever been stronger. And yet going into COVID, I felt like something needed to change. And I knew that change would hurt people. And I never, if I had been in my 30s to make the changes that we made, I don't think I would have cared nearly as much. I spent a lot of time in prayer, questioning God, and wrestling with this, and also just saying, how do we do this well so that as few people as possible will leave. So I as the senior pastor, I take responsibility for that more than the two of you. You guys have the opportunity to speak into all the decisions that we make, but ultimately I'm the one that makes those decisions. So those are my decisions, and I know that there are decisions that I've made that people have not liked, and as a result of them not liking it, they have left our church. And that saddens me. It saddens me on a lot of levels and for a lot of different reasons. It saddens me because maybe I didn't do a good enough job leading the change. It saddens me because it's just meant the end of relationship. I know that it was probably a couple of months ago that I was just sitting in a time of prayer, and I came to this moment of realizing that I've been in a grief for a while, because I have seen quite a few friendships that have, in some cases, been decades long, that have ended in the last few months. And that has weighed very heavy on my soul. But at the same time, when we as a leadership team were talking about what we were doing and praying about this, and we started talking about the changes we needed to make early on in COVID, and we started talking about, and really the foundation of those changes started long before COVID, that we were just talking about how do we better disciple people? How do we better help people become followers of Jesus? And then when COVID hit and we saw some of the response, and I'm not blaming any person in particular, and I'm not even just speaking about Living Springs. I'm also speaking about just the church on a broad level. It became very clear that the way that we do church doesn't really disciple people super well.
Yeah.
So we have to try and do a better job. And so I was in this place where I felt this real tension between, on the one hand, wanting to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit and wanting to do it well, and on the other hand, knowing that there was going to be a cost in personal relationships and friendships. And I felt that. And I'm not saying anything negative to any person who's left. Not a single person. I had a conversation this morning with somebody who there was a follow-up. I sent a text a couple of days ago to somebody who left our church a couple of months ago and just said, I just want you to know, I love you. You're always welcome here. And the response was basically, we're not coming back. And I was like, okay, but I just want you to know that you're welcome if you ever decide you want to. So I know that people felt hurt. I do not take that lightly. And I feel the weight of that in every decision that I make. I know, and I'll leave it there for now.
Well, I was going to add to that too, that I think you're speaking to specific people that you know that have had conversation with you, and yes, then at least there's an opportunity to reconcile that situation or that friendship or that relationship. You know, it might not come.
Sometimes there's not, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it doesn't always get to what we would hope that would be, but at least you can speak to it. There are other times, though, when people leave church or in general in life, leave a situation and say that they're hurt by it, but never tell anybody to give opportunity to that to be reconciled. And that does happen in church things too, right? Like someone could leave our church or any other church and then just say they were hurt by the leadership. But if they never talk to the leadership about that hurt, well, that's a sad situation because there's no reconciliation that could ever take place, right? Yep. So again, we're people, but I just wanted to say that too.
Yeah. I was going to say something similar too. Like if we are called to be the new creation family, we're supposed to be the family. I upset my wife regularly. I upset my kids. But I think, and I've been guilty of this too, getting in many different spots. So I'm not at all pointing any fingers, but I think we, as a Christian culture right now, again, myself included, have short fuses in comparison to the patience we're called to in the New Testament and how we're supposed to wrestle and walk those out with people and have difficult conversations. I have lots of friends, and you two guys would be included in this, of where we can have disagreement and also seek unity amongst that. And so I think sometimes in church, again, I've done this too, we can be quick to leave in hurt and not work those things out like a family can be called to do. And there's definitely toxic scenarios and places where you should run from family or church, but I don't think that's all the cases. And I think sometimes we're quick to do that.
And there have been people who left well,
Yep.
but there's still been a grieving
Absolutely.
that I've
Absolutely.
felt because, like I said, I was thinking about one relationship in particular, and I was thinking, I have been a part of this family's life for 25 years, and I have walked with this family and some members of this family through incredibly difficult things, and it was just like, and we're gone, and that hurt. But that's okay, right? Like I know that we are making change, and that change is not going to be for everyone.
Yeah.
So my only hope would be if you find out that somebody is leaving the church because they've been hurt by leadership, please ask them if they've talked to the leadership. That'd be the only thing I would ask.
Yeah.
Because when I say some people didn't leave well, it sounds like I'm putting it on them, and I'm not, right? But I guess that with some people, the relationship didn't end well. So, yeah. So I appreciate this. To get into the next part about accountability, again, and I think this question is probably more just practically directed to me than the two of you,
Yep.
because I do think that I'm the one who, if things are going to go a certain direction and people are going to be hurt, I'm the one who ultimately makes the call and the buck stops here. And I prayerfully work through these things. I talk to the board. I talk to the other pastors. I talk to other pastor friends that I have. I talk to other people that I know and trust without getting into specifics. And I regularly, in any one of these situations, seek out as much counsel as I can before making any decision. So, yeah. I try not to make any of these decisions lightly. I realize the sacred responsibility of pastoring people. And maybe that's what I get more than I did in my 30s is what we do here and how it matters and how we are impacting people's lives, hopefully in a positive way. With that opportunity to impact people's lives in a positive way comes also a possibility to impact people's lives in a negative way.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I was talking to a new family from our church just recently, and I can't remember exactly what the question was, but they asked something about you, Doug, and I said, well, actually, I've had the luxury of being your friend for a long time. And I said essentially what you just said. I said, I think Doug has probably, as I hope I have, and even the family I was talking to, I put it on them too, that we have changed over time, that there's just things that we learn, and hopefully we learn for the better. So yeah, it's real. Yeah. I think there's lots of dynamics at church as well.
Are you telling us we got to be done in 2 minutes?
We're running out of time,
Okay,
so I'll just say this quickly. I've seen like really great small churches or even church homes, right, where they have such excellent relationships. But then if someone leaves that group, theirs hurt immediately, right?
Yep.
But then I've been a part of a very large church, and people leave and we don't even know. And I'm like, there's a dynamic no matter which church you're at, right?
Yep.
So,
can I just say if somebody has some more questions or wants to follow up on this question more and the other ones, but I think this one specifically, we'd like to continue this conversation in next week's podcast. We are running short on time, and so we have to acknowledge that because there's only so much we can do. So if the person who asked this question has a follow-up, if anybody who's listening wants to address this, wants us to continue this more, please, this would be a question that I think would be very much worthwhile continuing the conversation next week.
Yeah.
This is not just a theological question. This is a very real-life question, and these are my favorite questions on this podcast,
Absolutely.
much as I enjoy the other ones.
Yep.
So, but with that, because we're pressed for time, we will let you go. But we would love to hear some feedback from you if you have any thoughts on this or anything else that we've said.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.
see you later.
Have a good week.